Welcome back. Let's get some more reaction to the government's new definition of extremism. I'm joined, as you can see, by the former head of the British Army, General Lord Dannatt. A very good morning to you, Lord Dannatt.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. So you've been looking into this new definition. What was your sort of immediate reaction?
Well, it's not as contentious as perhaps we feared that it might have been. I was one amongst several others who signed an open letter to the government last week to say, look, come on, this is an important issue, but let's not make this a party political issue. Let's try and build a consensus in the best interests of the country. I mean, let's face it, the first duty of government is to protect the citizens of this country, both at home and abroad. And of course, that feeds into the wider discussion about our defence spending, which we can perhaps come back to.
Yeah, and in terms of the definition, as you look at it today, you don't think they've crossed that line to make it party political?
Well, in a sense, the new strategy that they've put in place, which is to say we're going to review groups and see whether the government should sever its ties with them, you could say that in some way this kicks it down the path a little bit, because the decision on which groups might have their groups severed to government is going to be a matter of consideration by an expert committee. So it puts it slightly more at arm's length from the government point of view. I think the key issue here is when the Prime Minister came out 2 weeks ago, he said, look, we've got a problem. He was trying to build consensus, he was trying to show some leadership. And I think this is an issue that stands above, particularly in an election year, should stand above party politics. It's an issue that we need to confront so that our society can live in harmony with itself. There's a right to free speech, there's a right to protest, but there have to be limits.
I mean, putting the specific definition announcement today aside, do you think that there has been politicisation of this? I mean, I guess it's what might have triggered you to sign that open letter, whether it was a speech in Downing Street by the Prime Minister, or much more relevant perhaps is the way that the Conservatives jumped on comments by a Labour candidate Azhar Ali, the way Labour have jumped on comments by a Tory party donor this week. Do you think all of that has gone a step too far because perhaps it's an election year?
In part I do, because I think this is a national issue. This is an issue that should stand above party politics. I mean, I'm an independent member of the House of Lords. I think we do need to build a consensus. We do need to see some leadership. And I think opposition parties need to think very carefully about whether this is something they actually ought to support the government in the best interests of all the citizens of this country, rather than snipe on a party political basis, which is the danger this year in an election year.
Let's talk about protecting the country abroad. Would you have liked to have seen a boost in defence spending in the budget? Did you expect it?
I hoped for it, but didn't expect it. I think the case for an increase in defence spending is growing. What I found rather perplexing was Jeremy Hunt saying in his budget speech, we will go to 2.5% of GDP when conditions allow. Now, that's quite odd. That's a bit like saying in a test match, well, the bowler, you just don't start your run-up until the batsman's absolutely ready. I don't think we can guarantee that Vladimir Putin is going to wait until conditions allow for us to go to 2.5% of GDP or beyond before he is more aggressive in Europe.
Well, sure, but of course, we have crossed the 2% threshold, which others haven't, and there's a pledge to get there. I guess that putting it the other way, what is the condition of our forces, the army, but all defence forces at the moment? Is there a necessary requirement that we spend more immediately to be ready for the threats that we face?
Most certainly there is. I think if you look at the commentary, I think you can make the case right across the three services that the Navy, the Army and the Air Force need more investment. I think if you look at the Royal Navy, the difficulties, and I'm not sniping here, that the aircraft carriers have had. The number of frigates and destroyers that we've got is really very small, too small, given that we're an island nation and 90% of our trade comes through the sea lanes of the world. And then you look at our army, which has been hugely underinvested in, really since the end of the Cold War. Most of the savings have come in the land forces area. And that's fine. The government can take risk on these things. But a brutal land war in Europe, which started in February 2022, rather underlines the need to make sure that we've got a good land deterrent capability. And this, of course, is the issue. It's not about preparing to fight war, which, of course, if we do, is disastrously expensive. But it's having the military capacity to deter aggression from other people. And I think we're underinvesting in our deterrent capability.
To what extent are we vulnerable as a nation right now?
We are vulnerable if Ukraine fails. So we absolutely have to ensure that Ukraine succeeds and that Russia does not succeed in Ukraine. And of course, this is potentially more difficult if Trump wins the United States presidential election and either goes as far as withdrawing the United States from NATO, which I don't think he will do, and I certainly hope he doesn't do, but if he significantly reduces the amount of money and support going into Ukraine, because if we're going to help Ukraine succeed, Europe's got to pick up the slack there. And that's going to be really quite a bill. And let's face it, we're sort of trumpeting ourselves. We've done rather well for Ukraine by giving them £5 billion over the last 2 years. But our defence budget is £50 billion. So we've actually given them the equivalent of sort of, well, less than 10% over 2 years. And it's really important that we go on supporting Ukraine. And all this plays into the argument to say, yes, we are spending 2.2% on defence. The NATO minimum, not a target, the minimum is 2%, but there is a strong case that we should go to 2.5% or possibly even 3%. Bear in mind, in the Cold War, we were spending between 4 and 5%, and that prevented the Cold War from ever going hot. That's the price of deterrence.
General Lord Dannatt, thanks so much for joining us. Pleasure as always.